Hello everyone and welcome to the moment you've all been waiting for. It's the Candidates Tournament 2020 and we're starting off with what I believe is the best game of round 1, Anish Giri versus Jan Nepomniachtchi. And it's the best game of round 1 because it's just extremely well prepared, it's extremely complicated, and it's it should be in books, you know, the positions that arise in the game. But we're gonna get back to that. What I've prepared for you also is a nice photo of the opening ceremony of the 2020 Candidates Tournament. So here, as you can see, I've seen this on Twitter. Leech has published it. It's the it doesn't seem like they're interested in the whole no large gatherings idea. And first I thought it was a joke, but there you have it. FIDE President Arkady Dvorkovich next to Anatoly Karpov, and I believe the woman in red in the front row is Ho Yifan. I could be wrong though. But yeah, very interesting. I didn't think there'd be such a large gathering there. But okay, it does say that everyone present there is being tested twice a day. I don't know about all of them. I know that you know, the players are there, seconds are, and could be that they're all being tested twice a day. But yeah, just thought you'd enjoy that. And also here we have a nice photo of Nepo. Here you have it with his mask, ready to join his teammates at the Lin Kuei. But instead of the old get over here, it's more likely going to be stay over there. And also here is a nice photo, well, not a photo, basically their previous head-to-head score. As you can see, in classical games, Anish Giri beat Jan Nepomniachtchi 3-2 with 2 draws, so definitely in favor for Anish. But including rapid and exhibition games, Jan Nepomniachtchi beat Anish Giri 9-5 with 9 draws. So if we go into faster time formats, then Nepo has the upper hand. And also, before we check out the game, the first move was made by none other than former world champion Anatoly Karpov. There you have it. So all that being said, let's check out the game. Giri opens with knight to f3. We have, sorry about that, we have the reti on the board. We have knight to f6 by Nepo and c4. We have c5, so basically transposing into the English, knight c3 and the knight to c6, the 4 knights of the English. We have d4, c captures on d4, knight captures on d4, and now e6. Just continuing development, we have g3, and now bishop to c5 was the go-to move, for example, I believe in 2019, but in 2020, queen to b6 seems to be the main idea for black. We have knight d to b5, going for that d6 square, and now comes knight to e5, not of course allowing knight to d6 check, so knight to e5, now both the queen and the bishop are controlling the d6 square, and now bishop to f4. So this has all been played before, nothing new, and now knight f to g4. Here Nepo is threatening to capture on f2, and of course if you play something like bishop captures, then of course queen captures on f2 is the idea. So e3, preventing that, and now a6, asking the knight to kindly leave the outpost, but of course before doing that, Giri plays h3, and these are all tested ideas. We have a captures on b5, h captures on g4, and knight captures on c4. So Nepo is up a pawn, but it's a double b pawn. Hard to say if it will be good or not. And this is a known theoretical position. Queen to the position has been reached 12 times in top tier games, and queen to b3 was always played here in every of those games. But here Giri prepared rook to c1. So rook to c1 is a new move, and this is what Giri prepared for Nepo to deal with in the first round of the Candidates Tournament. So it is as of move 12 that we have a completely new game. So a d5 has to be played at some point, and there's no point in going queen to b3, d5, and now there's no point in going queen to b3, as d5 nicely guards the queen. So instead of rook to c1, you could have gone queen to b3, because then, okay, you had a double attack on this pawn here, and if the queen was on b3, you could capture on c4. There was the threat of, well, if pawn captures, then the queen on b6 is undefended. But here, b3 by Giri, attacking the knight, and here Nepo went into a deep think. So this is all well within Giri's preparation, but it's very unlikely that it is within Nepomniachtchi's preparation, as Giri did most likely surprise him with that rook to c1, and as Nepo really started burning his time, probably had to find everything over the board. So here, basically, what you're deciding, you don't want to move the knight. If you move the knight, you're just giving back the pawn. For example, if knight d6, bishop can capture it. Let's say bishop captures, and then you capture, bishop captures on b5 with check. So that is possible, although if you have something better, you should play something better. For example, e5 is a very interesting idea. Just going for that bishop, and now after b captures on c4, you can capture on f4, and now not allowing black to fix his pawn structure, you can go c5, bishop captures on c5, and now bishop captures on b5 with check, where king would have to go to f8 if you don't want to lose castling privileges, but then g captures on f4, and it doesn't seem like white's doing all that bad. Black still has to figure out how to get the rook into the game. And but again, you are running into Giri's preparation, so he might have considered this. So instead of this e5 move, Nepo plays the strongest move recommended by the engine, and that's bishop to b4. So he sacrifices a piece, maybe temporarily, maybe not. It's hard to say. There are a lot of complications here. Giri basically captured it instantly. There was this talk of the move g5, but the g5 is such an artificial move to make in a position like this that it would be wrong to even talk about it if this wasn't such an important game like the candidates tournament. But the point of g5 is that after e5 comes, now the bishop is under attack. Now you play bishop captures on c4, and now after e captures on f4, you go bishop captures on d5, and after f captures on g3, now you go even king to f1, and if g captures on f2, now you play queen d3, and you allowed all of this. Okay, you unpinned, you allowed this pawn to come to f2, but now when you look at it, it's actually black king who's in the center of the board. You cannot castle because of queen to h7 checkmate. Really hard to do. For a human over the board, I believe impossible to evaluate. But okay, that's why I said the only reason I mention it is because it's the candidates tournament. But okay, Giri instantly played b captures on c4. I'm sure Giri is aware of the g5 move, but he decided that for practical purposes, not really something worth gambling on for such an important game. So he immediately played b captures on c4, and now Nepo is down a piece, but he has a knight here pinned, so he continues attacking it. Rook to c3, rook to a3, threatening to pick up the knight on c3. Bishop to e5, very important move, guarding the knight, and now it seems like black can trap the bishop with f6 and e5. Problem is, after f6, which was played in the game, Giri has bishop to d4, which comes with an attack on the queen, so you don't have time for e5. But now queen to a5, adding a third attacker here, and now the problem is you cannot defend it 3 times. For example, if queen to c2, then e5 is extremely strong, and now you have to go into this rook captures, captures, and captures, and only now e captures on d4. And now, for example, queen g8 check, king to d7, e captures on d4. You could try something like this, bishop captures on c3, but now after king to e2, pretty much everything falls apart. You could drop in a few checks, but it's not going to be a problem. The king can always hide on the queen side, and you are just down a piece. So, of course, completely winning for black. So, after this queen to a5 move, Giri tried bishop to e2. He has to make a room for the king on f1. Bishop captures on c3 with check, and now here's the problem. If you go bishop captures on c3, rook captures, and queen captures on c3, with check, of course, king f1, and now b captures on c4. You've undoubled your pawns, you've created an incredibly strong passed c pawn, b5, b4 is coming, and this looks to be more or less winning for black. So instead, we have rook captures on c3. And again, Giri played all of this incredibly fast, saying that probably he's still well within his preparation. We have rook captures on c3, and now king to f1 unpinning. So Giri sacrifices the exchange, and now, now it's Nepo to make the move. And here the strongest move by the engine is b captures on c4, and this is most likely what Giri was planning on, that Nepo will play this move, and then he probably had something ready. For example, if you capture, then okay, you again created this incredibly strong passed pawn, but now g5, and it seems like white is on the attack. For example, if castles, then queen to b1 can be very strong, again putting pressure here, but black can easily defend, so not quite the greatest of plans. For example, f5 defends mate, and it's not a problem. So after this g5 move, you would have to figure out something else. It doesn't really work here. After b captures on c4, you would most likely have to try something else. Either go for the rook, or maybe Giri had this g5 move planned and he had all the calculations, ready up his sleeve. But the problem is, after some 10 minutes of thinking, b4 was played by Nepo, and here he didn't grab here. He just pushed the pawn here, saying, okay, if you capture the rook now, I will give you back the exchange, but then I already have a passed pawn on c3. And now Giri went into a think, and this is the first time Giri went, I believe it was a 10-minute think, the first time he went into a think since the game started. And well, point is, if captures, it's just an incredibly strong pawn on c3. Like, you could go bishop d7 to a4, kick away the queen, get the pawn all the way to c2. Seems like an incredibly strong pawn. So instead, after this b4 move, Giri continues in the same fashion as if Nepo captured on c4. He continues with this g5 idea. He wants to bust open the position and attack the black king. And here, it's again Nepo to make a choice, and the choice is basically between e5, kicking away the bishop, or capturing on a2. Capturing on a2 is incredibly interesting, because if captures on a2, then you get the g captures on f6, captures, bishop captures, and now if bishop captures, then it's not good for white. For example, rook to f8, and you will have incredible pressure here on the f2 square. Due to the queen and the rook nicely combined like this. For example, now if bishop captures on c3, b captures, and you cannot move the bishop due to checkmate, and well, c2 is again coming. It's going to be very, very unpleasant. What you could do is, after this g captures on f6 idea, play king to g2, but this is all very very incredible stuff to find. And now after queen to c2, offering a queen trade, now bishop captures on f6. Queen captures on d1, bishop captures, or even better, rook captures on d1, and now, for example, castles, you attack the bishop captures, pawn captures, and now rook to c1. So now you will win back your pawn, and it seems like this should be playable. But a lot of things to find after this g5 move by Giri. So capturing on a2 is basically trading down into a draw. But instead, Nepo goes for e5. He likes his position, he wants to keep the tension. So now he basically forces bishop captures on c3, which is what Giri does. We have bishop captures, pawn captures, and now g captures on f6. Nepo recaptures, and now we have queen to b1. C captures on d5 also seems like a reasonable idea, but Giri seems reluctant to waste a tempo here grabbing the pawn. So instead he goes for queen to b1, and the queen is very active here. The queen controls the h7 square, so rook captures on h7 might already be an idea. Black could have problems developing the bishop due to queen captures on b7, so it's an incredibly strong move, and again creates more complications. So Nepo immediately brings back the queen c7, just guards this and also that twice. What's happening here? Regarding the clocks, it's 58 minutes Giri and 48 minutes Nepo. And only a few minutes ago, Giri was over an hour and a half, and Nepo was really struggling. So here, Giri is out of the safe waters of preparation, and he also now has to burn time. So again, what's happening here after queen to c7? Here, let's say c captures on d5. c2 is very strong. So also the queen from c7 does a great job of doing everything. For example, queen c1, now comes bishop to f5, just controlling that pawn. Ideas like bishop, queen here, followed by queen b1 are possible. It's gonna be very unpleasant. And on the other hand, after this queen to c7 idea, you could try something like rook to h4. It's very useful because it reinforces c4, prevents d4, and it's just a much more active piece than having it on h1. For example, if d captures on c4, you just capture here, and the next move you're gonna capture the c3 pawn as well, because after bishop to h3 check, king g1, and black doesn't have a decent continuation here. So after queen to c7, Giri didn't go for any of these ideas. C captures a rook here. He played queen to d3, and here he allowed something more than he should have to Nepo. So feel free to find this mysterious move while I give you a couple of seconds, and also while I have a nice sip of my water. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, as it's really sticking out to that move. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's b5, and b5 creates a lot of problems here. Point is, if you do something, let's say capture on b5, then c2 is incredibly strong, and it's there's not a lot you can do against this. You could just give up the exchange, of course, with king to g2, and then just bring a queen into the game, rook captures and queen recaptures, but that's just trading down into a losing endgame. So now we would go into a forced bishop h5 check, king e7, queen to a3 check, queen to d6, queen to a7 check, blocks with the bishop, and now you have to guard c1, so king to g2, but now comes d4, and this is just beautiful stuff. E captures, pawn captures, and now if you allow d3 and d2, it's game over. So let's say rook to e1 with check, king to f8, and now comes queen to a8 check. But after you move the king, it is impossible to stop the pawns. So it's although it might be you might be able to hold with perfect play, not something you want to even try. So instead, capturing here, it's the same idea, you just push c2. So here, Giri instead played queen captures on c3, but now comes b captures on c4, and now again, Nepo created an incredibly strong pass pawn, and if he can get something like bishop to e6 in, to reinforce c4 and push d4 somehow, then that's just it. So Giri forces him to break up his pawn structure, and here what Giri is expecting is likely d4, and after captures, just go into this endgame, bishop captures here, and the material on the board is equal. Most likely we just trade down into a draw. However, Nepo would not be Nepo if he played something like that. He played d captures on e4 instead. He says, I don't mind ruining my pawn structure, but I will grab a pawn. And here the problem is, if captures and captures, now okay, it's similar, but it's black who's up a pawn. It's a double e pawn, but still only black can be better here, and the Nepo is very happy to play this until forever, to force Giri into submission. So after d captures on e4, we have rook to h4 by Giri, now adding more pressure on the fourth rank. He wants to recapture this with the rook, but now bishop to e6. Now Nepo has a nicely protected passed c pawn, whereas Giri has a passed a pawn. We have rook captures on e4, winning back the pawn, and only now Nepo castles. So what's happening here? Bishop captures on c4. This is a move that Giri will live to regret, unfortunately for him. Not unfortunately that he will live, but that he will have to regret it. Bishop captures on c4. It looks like such a juicy pawn, and the bishop is nicely protected. However, it's really not. So once again, feel free to pause the video and try to refute this idea by finding a great move for Nepo while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting that if you're not pinned, then it's actually white who's pinned. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's king g7. Now, there's no pin for black, but there is a pin for white. You cannot move the bishop because your queen is undefended on c3. So, queen to b3, immediately I'm pinning, but now rook to b8. Now Nepo brings the rook into the game. And here it's impossible to find a good square for the queen. That's the problem. For example, if queen d3, you can just bring the bishop over here, you win material. If you try something like queen to a4, then bishop to d7 is very strong. And again, if queen to d1, you can't keep an eye on everything, then bishop here. And although you can keep an eye on the bishop, let's say you go rook to h4, but then rook to b1 just wins the queen. So a lot of problems for Giri. So after considering for quite some time, Giri decided to give up the queen. Bishop captures on e6. We have rook captures on b3. And now first, before recapturing, first of course Giri gives Nepo an opportunity to blunder the game with rook g4. Now of course if king h8, rook to g8 is mate. Nepo, of course, is not interested in such a checkmate, so king to f8, and only now bishop captures on b3. So here, bishop and rook against the queen. Giri is hoping to hold this to create some sort of a fortress, and of course Nepo is here to try and prove otherwise. And here, this is basically where the game starts. Up until now, it was Giri's preparation against Nepo's incredible resilience, and you know, he just He just stood in there and came out on top. But is it enough? Well, we'll just have to wait and see. Queen to c1, check by Nepo. We have king to g2, and now queen to c6, check. Just checking if Giri will maybe touch any squares that he shouldn't. We have king to g1, and now h5. Kicking away the rook. We have rook to g8 with check, king e7, rook g7 check, king d6. And now rook to h7 going after the h5 pawn. And here we have queen to e3 defending. And now this is move 38. We need 2 more moves to reach time control. Giri is down to 2 minutes and Nepo is down to 18 minutes. So Nepo a lot better doing on time. We have rook to h8, just wasting a move. Giri really needs to reach time control, and now e4, hoping to get that e3 move in, and this is move 40. Giri really needs a good one, and he finds it. Rook to d8 with check, king to e7, and now not moving the rook, but first bishop to d1, and this was crucial for Giri to find, not allowing Nepo to get pawn to e3 move. So queen to c3, and now rook to d5. d5, excellent square for the rook, because you want to play bishop to d3 to guard the rook, the pawn, and everything is nicely guarded. So h4 by Nepo, he knows that in order to win this, you just need to bust open the position. If he can get h4 and e3 in, that's pretty much game over. So g captures on h4 by Giri, and now you could try e3 in, but, well, we do go into this, captures with check, king g2, let's say queen e4 check, bishop to f3 to guard the rook, and now queen captures on h4, and, well, it's hard to say. If you don't know if this is a draw or if this is winning, you don't want to rush into it. For example, what if this rook just goes here, let's say, well, maybe not to e2, because you shouldn't allow this pawn here, but I don't know, somehow finds his way, let's say on e4, and you bring the pawn to a4. Is this a fortress? Is it not a fortress? It's hard to say, because, well, black always has f5, so you will not be able to use these 2 squares to you know, move around the rook. But he doesn't want to risk it. Instead of e3, Nepo finds f5. He wants to just play f4 and then e3, and that's just game. Because if rook captures here, then he has queen to e1 with check, picking up the bishop on d1. The problem for Nepo is that Giri actually played rook captures on f5, and now we go into a deep study. Queen to e1 with check, with king to g2, queen captures on d1, and now comes rook to g5. So here's a position for you to analyze. What would you play here? I'm not going to ask you to find the move, because this is really a deep study, and Magnus Carlsen himself said that this is an easy draw for white, so it's not at all clear how to go about this, but if you want, you can pause the video and just think about a position. How would you go about it? If you've done that, congratulations, I commend you, but we're gonna continue the analysis now. So here, Nepo tried queen to a1. He wants to grab the pawn here, but I will show a forced line that starts with queen to f3 check, because it's just, well, something once you see it, maybe it sticks, but it's hard to say. King to g1, now queen to f4. You want to get rid of the h4 pawn, so rook to g3, queen captures on h4, and now a3. And it seems like this is the dream for white, because you have the a pawn protected, and you can just switch the rooks. Rook e3, rook g3, rook e3, rook g3, and you've created a fortress. But there is a problem here. King d6, king to g2, king d5, you're going to go king g1, just repeat moves, king to c4, king to g2, and now queen f4. You're gonna go king g1, just repeat moves, or rook to e3, doesn't really matter, because here it's a problem. If you go king to g1, then even queen captures on g3 is a move. F captures and king d3, you're gonna go here and to d2, and you are just much faster in queening. So you will not be able to go for this. So after queen to f4, you cannot allow to move the king and allow queen captures. You're going to have to go for rook to e3. But now king d4, again threatening to win the rook this way. And again, your pawn is faster. So rook g3, but now queen to d2, king to g1, and now comes queen to d3. And again, you cannot offer the rook because, well, your pawn will be just faster. And this way you've created a bridge for the king to cross. The queen is shielding the king from the rook. This is very, very exciting stuff. King g2, and now king c3. You're gonna go rook e3, king b3, you're gonna go pick up the pawn, king, let's say king g3, or rook goes back, doesn't really matter. But now king captures here, and now it's just winning. There's not much you can do here. At some point you're either gonna get here, pick up the rook with the queen, and then queen the pawn, or if just captures, then this is winning. But yeah, really just wanted to mention that because it's well, it's hard to imagine such things. But okay, Nepo went for queen to a1 instead, and now we have rook to g4, a tricky move. Giri wants for this capture to happen, and then after rook captures here, then indeed it will be incredibly hard to win this. For example, king f6, you're just going to go rook to e3, and now it's going to be hard without the pawn. So not hard, it's going to be impossible to win this because you don't have anything to play with. So after rook to g4, queen b1 defends the pawn, and now comes rook to g3. Again, here Giri decides to give up the a2 pawn, but the point is after a3 and queen to d3, we pretty much are going to the same line. Rook to g3 and queen to d5, now threatening e3 with check, king h2, and now a lot of different ways you can play this. Queen d1, king g2, and now king to d6. Again, you're going to bring your king, and it's going to be a similar. But a lot of things can happen. For example, king h2. If you go king h2, queen to f1 is incredibly strong. And now if rook g2 defending the f pawn, now you bring the king in. King e5. Let's say you try h5. You're going to go queen e2, go after the pawn. h6, king to d4, we have h7. Now you of course have to play h5 with check, pick up the pawn, king here, and now even e3. F captures, king captures on e3, and now without the f pawn for white, it will be of course winning. Let's say check, king f4, rook g2, and queen captures on h7, and now this is a known winning endgame for black. So that's why Giri decided that it was maybe best to waste a move and give up the pawn immediately, as it's not really crucial to him achieving some sort of a fortress. So rook g2, and then now comes queen captures on a2 by Nepo. Rook h3, now Giri will just try to wiggle with the rook. Queen to d5, threatening e3 with check, so king to f1, and now queen to d1 with check. King to g2, and now comes queen to g4 with check. Rook to g3, and now queen to h5. Problem is, everyone was saying that queen captures on h4 is a draw for Giri, because if queen captures on h4, then king f2, king f1, and everyone said that if king reaches e1 or e2, that this is a known draw. But there is a problem to this, because if queen to h1 check, then you have to go to e2, and now king e6. And now again you're gonna see something really incredible. Rook e3, how are you supposed to... It's impossible to create a bridge now, because both the king and the rook guard the d3 square, but you don't need the bridge here. King d5, you're gonna go rook g3, now king d4, you're gonna go rook e3, now queen h5. Now you try and kick away the king from the d3 square. So let's say king e1, you're gonna go queen to a5 with check, king e2, now comes queen b5 with check, king e1, queen to b1 with check, again king e2, now queen c2 with check, king to e1, and now queen to c1 with check. And here's the beauty. King e2, and now queen captures on e3. Pawn captures, and this is winning for black. King c3, and that's it. This is of course no one can know such things, but once you see it, then it's just amazing. King d1, of course, king d3, you gain opposition, captures, and of course it's winning. So after rook to g3, Nepo could have gone for rook captures on h4, but instead he went queen to h5. He wants to create a zugzwang, and he wants to he will try and win the h4 pawn with his king. So we have after this we have rook to a3 by Giri, and now he starts with queen to d5, again threatening discovery, king g1, and now king f6. We have rook to g3, cutting the king off, but now queen d1 check, king to g2, and now king to f5. We have rook to g5 with check, king f4, and rook back to g3. And now queen d5, again threatening this nasty discovery, king to f1, and now queen to d2, forcing the king to move yet again, king to g2, and now queen d1. And now you have to make a move. Either you start with h5, and then the queen just picks it up, or you can try something else. So rook to e3 was played, but now the king finally crosses the g file. King f5. We have rook to g3, now king f6, and now rook to h3. preparing to push the pawn, but now king g6. The king could have crossed the g file earlier, but doesn't really matter. Nepo has all the time in the world to try anything. Rook to g3 check, king to h5, and now rook to h3. Here Giri makes it a bit easier. He played rook to h3 instead of rook to e3. Point is that if captures then captures, we again reach this drawn endgame. King g5, rook e5, king f6, and now rook to e3 will be enough for a draw without the black pawn. So rook to e3 would have been more resilient, and again Nepo would have to find that whole idea that it should be it will be winning even with the h pawn to just shift the king over here and play this queen to d3. Incredibly strong move, and then of course the rook will not capture it, but then the point is that once the queen reaches d3, you create a bridge here, you bring the king over to e1, and then you have queen to e2 to f1 with check, and you pick up the f2 pawn. That's the winning idea. But Giri makes it easier with rook to h3, and now again a wasting move. Queen b1. You guard the pawn and force the rook to move. Rook to e3, and only now king captures on h4. So really incredible stuff. Rook to g3, but now king h5. But at this point, both Giri and Nepo knew that now it's completely winning, because now Nepo knows that bringing this king here and the queen to d3 move is what needs to happen. So rook h3, king g4, we have rook to g3, king to f4, and now rook to e3. We have queen to d1, just not allowing the king any moves, controlling more squares, preparing queen to d3. We have rook to a3, and now king e5. You need to bring the king to d4. We have rook to g3, king to d4. We have rook to e3, and finally on move 73, Yanni Pomnishi played queen to d3, and it was in this position that Anish Giri resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Like I said, if the queen is captured, of course, the d pawn is much faster than the f pawn, obviously. But if it's not, it's the idea we've already discussed. If rook g3, you're just going to play king c3, try and wheel your way in with the king, and here you don't really have any moves. The king is just going all the way to e1, and then queen f1 followed by captures here. Or if you play something, again, just captures, and king to d3 is a winning king and pawn endgame for black. King f2, king d2, you gain up position. Of course, the white king cannot touch f3, so you have to move, captures, and now, of course, it's completely winning. King d3, you just push the pawn. Let's say you go here, and now pawn here. This game is so complicated, my computer seems to be lagging. It's really incredible. But yeah, king f2, of course, you go to d2, and then you queen the pawn and win the game. But yeah, really incredible stuff. Everything about this game was just awesome. The opening, Giri's preparation, you know, Nepo just riding out the storm. It was really incredible. And then Nepo actually winning this with black in round 1 of the 2020 Candidates Tournament. We are definitely off to a great start. And if you don't know, there were some other surprises in round 1, so we're going to cover all of them before we actually show the standings. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I'm sure Giri didn't, and he's going to really have to collect himself before going into round 2. I would like to thank Frank Combs and Jeremy Ehrert for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Candidates Tournament and whatever we can squeeze in maybe on rest days regarding the Morphy Saga and your suggestions, but we'll see how it goes. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.